I've got a favour to ask you. In order for us to keep growing this podcast and getting better and better guests, could you do one thing for me? Hit the subscribe button. It will make a massive difference and it'll help us reach more and more people. So, our special guest today, Nigel Hedges, the Chief Information Security Officer at Chemist Warehouse, a place we almost all have been in, I'm sure. He's covering some really interesting topics. He speaks around the changes to the Privacy Act, CISOs, how they can't be a department of no anymore, and a tribe mentality with a group of CISOs he built through COVID, doing support and helping share conversations that has actually benefited his roles now. He also gives his thoughts on the cybersecurity strategy. So let's dive in now. Welcome back, listeners. It's great to have you here again. Today we've got special guest Nigel Hedges, who's the Chief Information Security Officer at the Chemist Warehouse, something in Australia we see everywhere. So today we're going to discuss how organisations like Chemist Warehouse and generally, other large private cybersecurity organisations are not just defending against threats at all the time, but they're really pioneering strategies to bring the entire C-suite and board along their cybersecurity journey. And so we're going to delve into this crucial role of leadership that's really shaping a secure digital future.
Excellent. Thanks, Tommy. Well, I think Nigel and I have we've known each other for a while, but for the people, mate, who aren't on it, and thank you for joining us, especially, with the newest addition to your CV is the Chemist Warehouse. But do you want to just go back in time, mate, and just give us a bit of a rundown, sort of, if whatever chronological order you want, to sort of how you got to where you are now and sort of, just the listeners, how you got there and what the progression's been.
Yeah, so I've been in the IT industry for 25 years. It hurts to say that, but probably a little bit left field in that I started my career in the vendor and software consulting space in the information security, cybersecurity areas, working with end-to-end technologies across PKI, directory, antivirus, firewalls, content inspection, and so forth. And it was a really good experience in terms of technology. Migrated to more of a consulting and sales engineering space for a few years there. Prior to sort of getting into mid-career space, where decided after working with several large global vendors in the cybersecurity software space that I'd have my own triad management, and that was a good period of time as well. And then got to a period around the early 2010s where, after some good stint in technical management and technical director roles in the vendor side, I got the hunger and the taste to work and support customers directly. So, hence the move over the last decade or so into working for larger enterprise organizations. And I landed in, I guess, more of the retail space, and it's been really good. So, certainly the last 8 years or so has been in leadership roles, specifically in the head of cybersecurity and CISO domain. So here we are.
Thanks, mate. It's just good to backfill because everyone sort of in cyber has come from a different angle or a different way at it. No one's, especially at CISO level, you don't start off Ben Doyle is a rarity, being over 20 years, sort of as a CISO or, in that title, but it's new for most of us, and the reason we love having you guys on here is there's such variance with the CISOs. Because of that skill base and where they've come from, you do get the more technical ones. You get ones that are probably better at dealing with board and other aspects of it. It's such a multifaceted role. What do you see as the biggest changes? Because you've been in some big ones. Came up before where you are now previously, but what are you sort of noticing as you're going along the journey? Obviously cybersecurity gets spoken about a lot more, a lot bigger, highly known attacks that the general public knows about it. So you're sort of getting more into the spotlight, whether you like it or not. But what are the sort of biggest changes you've seen now to date and you sort of look for going forward into the future?
You're right, and if I just backtrack a second, I think to your sort of earlier points, I think having that sales engineering experience where I was working with sales and customers, and basically translating between business and technologists really came in handy with moving into this space, because that's part of our role, right? Is the ability translate requirements between business and technology. Um, and it's always been a challenge to sell, if you like, because we're also always selling. Doesn't matter what you do. Internally, all CISOs are selling a vision and a program and hoping to get funding to address the risks. Um, and it has been challenging. And a lot of my peers, we collaborate and talk, and fear, uncertainty, and doubt is never a good strategy. It's not a long-term strategy with our board and our top management. So, I think it's unfortunate that some of the notable breaches in the last 2 or 3 years have driven that point home, and certainly the activity from the Minister for Cybersecurity and Home Affairs, MP Claire O'Neill, has brought that agenda to the forefront. And then, of course, changes to the Privacy Act have also assisted. And at the same time, what I've noticed is that CISOs in general have adopted that we need to change, and that has actually had a warm impact on our collaboration with other teams. And by that I mean that we're not the Department of No anymore. It's all about how do we be risk advisors and inform of how something may or may not be a great idea from a risk perspective, but we're not making the decisions, it's a business decision. So it's a partnership, and I think the combination of the issues that have happened and the risk profile of cyber being exploding over the last 2 3 years with Optus and Medibank and Latitude Financial as just examples. There's more recent ones now. They've certainly helped. And yeah, so it's a good outcome for CISOs as long as we can temper it and be fair.
And what are your thoughts sort of on the collaboration of that? So you do mention it. I know you guys are fairly close. I've got some of my best mates are obviously CISOs.
Mm.
What are you finding, and is that collaboration improving? Are you finding that actually is a bit tighter knit? I mean, we did an event a couple of weeks ago, which was a CISO 12. As you know, you're part of the group there. But what else can we do to try and help that collaboration? Because you do have your group, but is there ways we can sort of improve on that collaboration to help each other? Because it sometimes can be or seem to be a very lonely role.
Yeah, I more and more value the tribe mentality that's been developing, and just as we went into the pandemic, um, a few of us, and this is just my experience, but I know this has resonated. A few of us, as we, especially if we were a Victorian CISO going into lockdown, is that you had limited contact with peers, and you had just sort of mini groups forming. And for me, it was a fortnightly catch up on Zoom with 3 or 4 other CISOs, and we would just wax lyrical about, I guess, some of the challenges we're having as a lot of us shifted our workforce into remote working, and the challenges from a cyber perspective that had, and then all the other business movements that were happening at the same time to support the business as they also moved. And I guess the learning from that was actually a really powerful, somewhat cathartic experience, being able to talk to other CISOs going through the similar thing. We cradled each other and soothed ourselves to sleep. Um, and then as we exited, did we ever really exit the pandemic? But as we went out of lockdown, and in the last, say, 2 years or 3 years, that tribal connection has stayed, and I found that a lot more lunch sessions and dinner sessions where, as peers, we all get together and there's some form of topic that's mentioned at these events, but the actual benefit is to get a whole bunch of people together and talk about what we're experiencing and share notes. And I've seen a lot of value in that. And we always go back to our teams and say, "Did you know that such and such companies over here and here? This is how they're approaching this problem. This is a pretty good idea."
And we're sort of 6 months into the strategy now. So I don't recall. We haven't spoken about it, and I can't recall anything you published. But what are your sort of thoughts on the strategy? What did you see sort of as the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and possible threats? From that actual strategy.
Yeah, I've been floating around the edges of that. I did have some contributions to some of the thought process that the government had on their rights or what kind of responsibilities they would have in the event of a company having a cyber breach. So I've shared some of my thinking around adopting common approaches to incident management all the way through to crisis management, and sort of a methodology that could all be shared. And then beyond that, I think there's some really good notes in the strategy. I'm pretty supportive of the data sovereignty goals that we want to get to. Um, Having worked for Kaspersky back in the day, a Russian organization, and of course working for a lot of American organizations. I think rather than being political about this, so I would just simply say it's good to do things on our terms in Australia. So I'm a big proponent to bringing our infrastructure as much as possible back in house.
What does sovereign mean to you? And I'm talking obviously because it's sometimes fairly hard to define. When we've got such large vendors that seem to dominate our space here, and we don't really have that many billion-dollar companies ourselves in the cyberspace. I think BugCrowd just ticked over, say, in the last month or two, just before RSA, I think they sort of went there. And, we've got some companies that are large-ish, but what does sort of sovereign capability, or how do you see we can sort of improve that from our side of the fence?
Yeah. So my view on pretty much everything is the world is not black and white; it's shades of grey. And certainly, as we go into this, we can't be too prescriptive. But I think the end goal is that pretty much everything we possibly do, all the information that we hold, all the processes, all the people. Should be as much of in-house as possible, especially if it comes down to really sensitive data and sensitive assets and things like that. So yeah, for me, that is probably the net goal. As organisations, we can't get there unless we make those requests. And there are certainly a lot of vendors that have really massive investment in their infrastructure in the US, and they extend to Asia Pacific as far as sometimes Singapore. And if you're lucky, get to Sydney. Um, and so I think it's just a case of as we go through our RFPs and processes for requests to things like cloud platforms that we start to say that the next 3-year objective is going to be a changing requirement. We'll go from desirable to mandatory about having infrastructure in country. And what I find is that most of these organisations, like your big IaaS platforms, if they have enough customers asking for the same thing, they will actually satisfy that request.
I think from the Australian startups, often what we've done is we've not really solved for the main issues. And I think you guys, the CISOs, what the top three issues are that probably, if you could ideally have a genie in a bottle and say, I want three solutions that could be just made now, almost what would they be? And sort of how can we sort of guide our startups in a lane maybe that we pick? And I'll ask the AI questions a second after that, but I think just do that part first.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's sort of almost modelled a little bit on the academic and strength of our education system. Institutes in Australia, we're really good at that research capability. Uh, a lot of the technology from a cyber perspective feeds off large volumes of data that kind of rely on a larger population, I think. So certain, I don't know, endpoint detection products and things like that, I think it's hard to get that rich volume of telemetry here. Um, but what I've found useful is the thought leadership and thinking around GRC. So, I've invested in an Australian startup that focuses on GRC, but I think that's a great area to focus on, and the nimbleness of local Australian startups to be able to deal with feature requests, for example, and turn around new capabilities has been pretty astounding. So, I'm convinced, and I will always look for investment and startups where it makes sense.
Yeah, so where are you seeing Gen AI kind of, make an impact, amongst cybersecurity tools, and where is it really just a bit of a kind of, hype at the moment?
Yeah, I think we're at that cusp where the marketing machine of several organizations in particular are selling the dream, and then the practicalities of that are sort of being seen. I don't think it's long before we actually see that. If you think about security operating centers and SIEMs, for example, it wasn't that long ago that the solution was people on seats. We had eyes on glass 24/7. Some people working across the clock, people in the UK, US, and Asia supporting a sort of 24/7. And the human capital required for that is expensive. Some economies of scale moving to an MSSP model kind of helped with that. So organizations would move to MSSP. Then came security orchestration, automation response. So you had the SIEM SOAR capabilities. How do we automate some of these workflows? And then there was the challenges of getting infrastructure teams to agree that some automated tasks would happen and not cause outages. And then you go to hyper automation, and then next is, of course, AI. Um, and some of the big cats have already adopted a lot of AI capability to help with some of that mule work that a level one security or SOC analyst would probably do. So I think maintaining that human in the loop, so that what would happen in the past is a SOC level one analyst would cut their teeth on incidents and escalate where required, and over a period of time move to level two. What we'll see now is SOC 1 analysts learning with AI in security tooling, and so it is coming, and it's definitely there with certain platforms already. So I'm embracing it. I think it's a good thing, but with a human in the loop for the next decade or so, for sure.
One of the things I find really interesting is, I duck into a bustling Chemist Warehouse, go through when I check out, they grab my mobile number, they've got a fair bit of data around me and stuff like that. One of the things with the Optus and Medibank hacks, one of the things there is around that conversation with the C-suite and the CISO. Clearly, there were things there that were left wanting. So, how do you approach, kind of making sure everyone understands the value of the data that they're holding in an organization like you've worked in?
Yeah, I think endeavoring to get in front of the C-suite is always challenging. They're all got their day jobs and night jobs, and so I kind of like to start with that first philosophical catch up, and it's really that opportunity to get in front of them and explain, um, the individual or my approach to cybersecurity, that we're not here as the Department of No, that we're here to be advisors and to advise the business, leave a kernel of thought with them as to what my role is. And there's a great example that was used, and I stole it from the internet. I can't remember who I should attribute it to, but where it was like cybersecurity controls and processes are like cars on brakes on a car, where it's not designed specifically to slow the car down. It's to give confidence to go faster. So for me, that's my approach, is to sort of say, I know the business wants to improve speed to deliver, go to market, etc. My role here is to help with that. And on that basis, further conversations and future conversations come up around, as they always will, about where data is kept, etc. And it's like, well, what's appropriate, what's practical, and now with all the privacy law changes, should we really be retaining this information? And so, the last 5 years, especially, these are the types of questions in other organisations as well that I've fielded, and the C-suite are pretty good around levels of comfort around these types of risks, as long as you explain it in business terms.
So one of the big things that's really changed is this balance between compliance and customer experience. Like say 10 years ago, customer experience won every time.
Mm.
So how have you seen that change, and what kind of areas of that compliance do you think are the most important and have to be weighed up against customer experience?
Yeah, I had a well-respected peer of mine one day over lunch explain that you just can't solve all the problems. All you can really try to do is solve the ones that you think are going to be the most impactful, the problems that are going to get you, and explain to the board or top management that this is the case. If we do X, Y, Z, we'll solve these problems. And in my view, these are the things that we need to solve. So my approach to cybersecurity has always been as a risk-driven approach and compliance second, which seems odd because I think from a resourcing perspective, if you look at any of my org charts, you'll see that I have a GRC, an assurance head, or a senior group manager in most of the roles that most of the organisations I've built. So I do believe compliance is important, but if you lead through compliance, I don't think it gets the hearts and mindsets of the business. And so for me, it's been how do you, and it's usually a 2 or 3 year process, to be honest with you, to get people to change their minds to security is there to tell me what I should do and what I shouldn't do, even though I don't like it, to a point where we can actually have that conversation and say, I'm not comfortable as a security expert that this is the right thing to do. And so that how that connects to customer experiences, we have conversations with end users will log into a website and they will want to be able to purchase stuff very quickly. So, do we want to throw in a multi-factor authentication on the first purchase, for example? Um, when do we want to present some form of challenge to the person? Is it when it's the person has moved countries really quickly, and it's probably unlikely that they've gone from Australia to Greece in the space of an hour? And those kinds of things. So I think it's being practical about the friction that you put into the process. And I've always gone with probably more of an MVP approach because I find you get less things done quickly, and then you can grow from there, as opposed to coming in with the kitchen sink approach and having to wait through 6 months or 9 months of internal process to get things approved. So that's sort of been my approach.
What kind of stuff do you see? Like, what kind of attacks are you getting, or in very broad terms, what are the common ones that you're seeing out there at the moment?
Yeah, I think the Verizon data breach investigation report that came out recently pretty much summed it up. I think there's a lot of combination of web application based attacks. The business email compromise is still alive and kicking, and the baddies out there are definitely getting pretty clever and specific, targeting particular individuals and the VIP space. That's what we see is a lot more of it, or still those types of things. And the other thing is vulnerability management. So back 10 years ago, that used to be the thing everyone worried about, 0-day exploits, and we shifted our focus. What I'm seeing is a renaissance back to vulnerabilities in applications that are exploitable, and then the time frame between when it's widely known versus when it's patched. So yeah, they're the types of attacks that we're seeing, and of course attacks to desktop sharing, VDI type of solutions.
Just to go back probably a few steps, actually, just go to the people, the people element of it, because it's often misunderstood and probably misrepresented a lot of the time because we always hear it's 80%, 90%, whatever you want to do is human error in some way, shape, or form. I loved your post the other day about getting into the schooling system. That's something I've been an advocate for a long time. You get kids to put on seatbelts, brush their teeth, do all these sorts of things. We need to get the security part in a lot earlier into the piece. Loved your call out on LinkedIn the other day, just sort of trying to get the backing from that. What else do you think we can do to try and repair that? Because you're often trying to unlearn bad habits in the workplace rather than starting this pathway a lot earlier in schools and opening the opportunity for more people to participate in the industry as well.
Yeah, that was a great experience. Going to a local school and presenting to 120 grade 5 and grade 6 kids. Going into that, I thought this is going to be easy. Then you see 120 kids looking back at you. It was quite intimidating. What I learnt from that experience actually was, and I'll be honest with you, some of the material that I got from some of the folks. I put a post up on LinkedIn, and I had a lot of good vendors respond with information. It was really genuine kind of response to the requests. And with that material, I kind of crafted it in a way where I combined humor and the message. And there was such a great response from the kids. So I couldn't believe the level of questions that they were asking. What can I do to help my parents make sure that their personal information isn't breached? I was like, wow. I haven't had questions like that even from an adult audience. So it was, really, really impressive to see that kids around that kind of age, 10 to 12, I think, are so exposed to the internet, but they're also getting more aware, especially some of us digital immigrants versus the digital natives. And then I guess reflecting on that, on my journey in organizations, we often talk about people, process, and technology, and it's common to focus on technology. We think we have a problem, so let's go buy a widget or a technology, a platform or a SaaS platform or something that will fix that hardware, software. We go buy it and then we implement it, and then we put processes around it, and that's great. But as you rightly pointed out, a lot of the issues that we've seen are from just phishing, social engineering. This is how people have been got. So I'm not sure why some organizations struggle with the concept of a security awareness specialist or a full time security culture lead. But for me, that's a pivotal role. It's an absolute pivotal role. So we had a lot of success in one of my previous roles of bringing somebody in, and that person's focus was completely on a security awareness program. We did barbecues, we did podcasts, we did events. We celebrated the cybersecurity week in October. We did the privacy week in May, and we used these kinds of events to kind of spruik the message and talk about cyber. And it was really successful. And for a small investment, big returns. So that's kind of based on that success. That's now become part of my resourcing strategy going forward.
I think it's an often overlooked piece and something that, like when we started Cyber Aware, that's where we saw a biggest gap in the market was that awareness from people. And it just
Mm,
needs, we just need the basics sometimes, it doesn't need to be that complicated. And I think the new campaign that Home Affairs are doing with the, that Stay Alert, and starting with
mm,
passwords, passphrases, password managers, into MFA, into updates when available, you need that foundational stuff, don't you? And I think it's great what you said about the schools too, is that I think the main driver for a lot of people at work is also how do I protect my family? So if you're doing workplace training, it's not really about, some people hate their job, right? And they're like, I don't care about my workplace getting hacked. And some people probably wish it upon the workplace, right? But they don't want their family to get hurt. They don't want to lose money themselves. So often if you can actually get the training to be, how does it affect me and what's in it for me is one of the key elements is how you protect yourself and how can we teach you things that one, yes, it'll protect the business, but hopefully it'll make you safer at home as well. Not too different to workplace, sort of occupational safety training as well. So I think
yeah,
you've always
absolutely.
been a good advocate for that, man. I really talk. Tom and I have been having this conversation recently. I said, everyone sells. People have this real thing around selling, but you're always
Mm,
selling something, right? You're selling to your
mm.
family on why you should be able to go to golf and, play and have a couple of beers afterwards, or there's a sell something happening with someone in life, right? But you're always selling from the purpose of trying to usually help, right, or assist. And if you've got something, I always say to Tommy, the cure for cancer. I think often in cyber we've got the cure for cancer or for cyber issues, and we need to be more upfront about that and honest about really trying to help. But if you're coming from the place of help, which I know a lot of CISOs and a lot of us in the industry do, you shouldn't be ashamed of that, right? You should be able to sell, and you should be selling to your C-suite on why cybersecurity is such an important issue and why it protects the business and why it's worth spending money on. It's such a hard sell sometimes, but we need to be proud of it and actually try and help. What else do you reckon we can do to help sell the message?
Well, it's a good one, and I'd probably extend that back to the vendor ecosystem before I talk about the internal ecosystem again, because I think they lead to each other. So having come from vendor, what I realize is that whether you work on the customer side or you work on the vendor side, we all get up in the morning, we go through the same rituals, we send our kids to school, we worry about what's for dinner that night. We're all the same, and I think that gets lost in translation. And I think there's probably some historic examples where certain customers would try to beat vendors down on price, and some vendors would eye gouge their customers as well. You can't sort of base these fringe extremities as the basis of any future relationship. So I always think that you have to aim for the win-win with vendors, where we all get something out of it. And I found that when you go in with that approach, I've just found a really good relationship with vendors. How that extends is into insights. So when you're going to your CIO or COO or CEO, whoever your C-suite superior is, for trying to get authority on a business case and approval or endorsement, these vendors that are your partners can come in and give those rich insights about what's happening out there. Um, and if you've got the relationship, they'll do that in a very matter-of-fact way. And that's how I found a lot of success there. And then, of course, going back to the tribe, coming back with those learnings from your peers about what their focuses are. One of the things I learned a couple of years ago was really valuable going to a tribe meeting was that every single person in the retail sector for this meeting had identity and access management as a number one or number two priority. And with that insight, as much as you don't want to be hive minded about what you do, going back to the C suite and saying, this is a real problem in retail, so we should focus on it too. So a bit of combination of using insights from the industry, and also using the insights from the tribe.
I do like how you're kind of building experience and giving kind of the C-suite more than one opportunity to touch. And just going back a step too, the way you described that information campaign. So rather than trying to catch people out with a phishing email, you've got barbecues, you've got you build an experience, you provide a whole bunch of touch points for them to learn. I imagine that doing essentially a marketing campaign to the staff is more effective. So what kind of results do you get when you do that rather than the kind of trap them mentality?
Yeah, it's a carrot and stick type of mentality. So, I think about one organization I worked with a few years ago. There was an e-compliance module coming into the organization I had to do. It was 90 minutes about information security and PCI. And this is the stuff that I do and I love. But even I wanted to, punch myself in the face after doing that training. And so the less is more, and more often is the approach that I prefer. These barbecues, these tidbits, quizzes, meeting up with other businesses and giving them a 15-minute view of what we're seeing in cyber, adopting security awareness and adoption platforms that give little little 2 or 3 minute videos about cybersecurity and a couple of points, maybe one question quiz. It's easier to do monthly 5 minute investment for a work person, which might equate to 60 or 90 minutes, depending on how often you do it, versus the one time having to sit through a 90 minute of a very droll training. And then it's constantly on the mind. It's just there in the back for people to think about. Oh, I did remember listening about that "don't click on these links" thing from a couple of months ago. Maybe there's an example right in front of me. Maybe I should click on that. So yeah, I found that approach to be more successful. And I guess to your question, when you have people from outside of cyber come to you and say, "I really enjoyed that training," or "I really enjoyed that particular engagement or that discussion," then that's a good sign that going in the right direction.
What do you? I'd just be interested. I loved your breaks analogy before, and Tommy and I are big fans of any sort of stories or analogies. What are the best one or two that you can sort of think of that you use quite regularly that sort of help get the point across? Because it is, how do we break through that to the layperson? I think, and using examples like the brake in the car, or we talk about brushing teeth or seatbelts or different things like that. What's the best analogy or analogies that you've seen that you use quite regularly? You find have a good impact?
I think the two that spring to mind are probably house related. Um, Probably three actually. One I've said is that no one ever questions why we need a lock on our front door. At some point in the past, when we were cavemen, someone might have said, "You know what? We should put something in front of this cave entrance." And people went, "That's ridiculous. Why would we do that?" And now look at us. No one ever questions why we have doors and door locks. It's a safety mechanism. We're not wishing for the worst to happen, but it's a precaution. Um, Other things around sort of houses is when we're talking about, or for me anyway, about resourcing. Especially if you're coming from in an organization where you recognize a lot of technical debt. And I'm sure there's some listeners out there that are working in organizations that know they are carrying a lot of technical debt. So I've sort of said, imagine you are a brand new home owner or investment owner, and you want to flip a house next week. You've just bought this property, and you open the front doors, and you notice there is newspapers stacked to the wall. Someone's been collecting. So like you've purchased a house that was owned by a hoarder. There's toys, there's bits of wood, there's things strewn everywhere, and you could sit back and go, "This house is worth $1 million. Normally, for a house of $1 million, I would only employ one cleaner to help me flip this house in a week." But no, you've got a big debt, technical debt in the house, and you will probably need a team of 10 people to clean this up in time for the flipping. So I like to think of that because sometimes when we have these conversations with the executives, they will say, for a company of our size, we shouldn't really need a cyber team of X, Y, Z. We know such and such company down the road only has, 50% of what you're asking. Well, it's relevant to the risk and the amount of technical debt that's being carried in the organization. So that's another one. Yeah, sort of more house related. The last one is probably around cyber risk quantification because I had a group CISO at one of my last organizations talk to me about this. And I originally I was a little bit skeptical because cyber risk quantification is as old as the trees and hard to do. And one of the things I was looking at was the FAIR methodology around CRQ, and I started to come around to it, and some of the concepts around what you focus on in terms of the likelihood of an issue happening and the magnitude of an issue happening, I started to liken to a house. And if your house was facing a street and there were 100 people walking past, and you knew that 10% of people will look at your house, and out of those 10%, a further 10% will potentially walk in because they see an opportunity. Then in that house analogy, you might look to close the blinds so people can't see the high quality audio visual and TVs you have in your house, and that further reduces the risk of someone being attracted to your organization. So yeah, I like to use those kind of analogies.
It's so true, though. Like in my news cameraman days, we'd go out with the police often, and they'd say over and over again, the reason that car was broken into was there was a pile of gold coins in there. There was a laptop bag in there. So, you as soon as you kind of leave that obvious vulnerabilities or the blinds up, you are inviting people that are out there prowling it, I think.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
Look,
that's a
I've
good
got
point.
one last question, and then I'll throw it to Jason. So, just looking forward the next 12 months, generative AI has had quite an impact on, people's lives, as well as, the impact it's having on businesses using it, scan surface criminals and all things like that. But what do you think is going to be, the big issue for you in your role and, the biggest threat that we'll be facing in the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think when you work for an organization that is vibrant, doing well, expanding, diversifying, there's a lot to sort of take in there. And I applied the same approach I think I've applied in the last few years, and that is focus on the fundamentals, get some of the fundamentals right, build in enough process to work with security so that we're supporting them on things like supplier risk assessments, get a grip on third party risk, and then identify and provide some good tooling for third parties to have access to systems. And I will also look at the typical things around data and identity. For me, I've previously sort of drawn a picture around security integrations. I think that's key. So we need to learn information from different types of security controls and have that information inform adjacent controls. So if we learn that firewall sees a malicious IP, we should be able to use that data at the endpoint and form the endpoints across your estate, so that in that particular case, you might have a end user who's actually not on the network. They might be interstate or overseas, but if that malicious IP that we've detected is informing the endpoint and helps them block when they're remote, for me that's a success. So I'm looking at integrations and how do we make the security ecosystem streamlined and quick and efficient, and that's probably the big high level focuses. Apart from identity, data protections, and really the last thing is we have to accept that this is a risk. There's no silver bullets. So making sure that from a resiliency perspective, we can recover, we can restore, and we have the sufficient incident response capability to detect and respond as quickly as possible to limit the impact.
Excellent, mate. And I think final one, I'm just interested any sort of resources or anything you can do for people who want to, progress in the career. Where do you sort of look for best resources and best sources of information for yourself that you can sort of give a few tips for people listening?
So it probably depends on where people are on their journey. I think there are some great government resources, ACSC, the UK, NCSC, CISO. I think looking at things like the NIST cybersecurity framework, for example, is probably droll as it might seem. I think that it touches on a whole bunch of topics in security, and it's free. So you can download the cybersecurity framework, and you can then do some further research in particular areas. Um, some vendors provide close to free training or free training, and they might be a bit a vendor smelling and tasting, but I think that they're still worth doing to provide some kind of knowledge. And then there are some many people, if you have a job today, your organization might have Udemy or LinkedIn Learning, Access, and a lot of those platforms have some great cybersecurity courses. If not, I think they normally cost in the vicinity of $500 for a year, and that might seem like a lot, but it's a great investment in education. And Cyber is another example of a cyber specific learning platform with a lot of information. And I usually recommend that to somebody who's making a serious thought about entering into cybersecurity as a profession.
Excellent, mate.
Fantastic.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, that's great. That's great pieces of advice, Nigel. And look, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time out to join us. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Jason, for joining us as always. You're out in the field there, so it's great you
Field
had the
Marshal.
time to join us. I just want to say out to the listeners, thanks for getting this far with us, and please hit the subscribe and like button if you would like to hear more and to have more great guests like Nigel. You can find Nigel on LinkedIn. And have a lovely day, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks, Nigel.